Welcome to Second Earth Alternative. Today's episode is a topic that we have actually never talked about. And I think it's actually a topic that doesn't get discussed enough in the entire UFO alien community, but it's something that is extremely relevant. In fact, it's so relevant that it goes deep into the very question of what are they doing here? What do they want from us? So today I wanted to talk about spirituality, specifically how our spiritual nature, how that goes along with aliens and what aliens might think about our religions and what is their religion, what are they thinking regarding the spiritual nature of humans, or lack thereof if you're atheist or if you have other concepts. And I had actually shot an episode earlier today, but unfortunately the mic was completely broken and it just wasn't working. And I brought Lua with me, which is my dog. And I brought her because it's kind of an interesting metaphor, because we have this alliance with this other species that we consider to be cognitively lower than us, that doesn't have the same ability to think like us. And I know it's not a perfect analogy, because when dogs actually look at humans, their oxytocin levels goes up. And I think when humans look at aliens, it's kind of like something like this, maybe. Kind of horrifying. Maybe the very opposites. Maybe your adrenaline and all the other horrific chemicals that make you think you're about to die. At least initially. And of course, this comes to mind individuals like Travis Walton, who, if you ever saw the movie Fire in the Sky, which is based on a true story, he had a pretty horrific experience with an alien being. You know, we're talking about the abduction experiences. But what's interesting, we're going to talk more about this as the episode goes on, is not all abduction cases ends up being negative. In fact, they can sometimes start off as extremely scary and extremely negative, and in the end actually end up becoming quite positive, as is the case with somebody called Jem Sparks, and we'll talk about him in just 1 second. The reason why I'm using the metaphor of the dog is because we don't always prize intelligence as the number one thing. I mean, it's important. I mean, there is a positive correlation with intelligence, like we love dolphins because they're smart. We like killer whales, who apparently never killed a single human being in the wild, because they're so smart that they might actually have a culture to say, hey, these humans or whatever these things are that periodically go in the water, you know, they're not our food. They're not a threat to us, so let's just leave them alone. So in a way, intelligence can be positively correlated, but also we have to consider that dogs that are intelligent but at the same time end up eating your kid or ends up harming a neighbor, that behavior seems to be even more important than the dog's intelligence. And when I think about extraterrestrials and UFOs, I know UFOs technically mean unidentified, but I'm taking the Stephen Bassett's interpretation of it.
It's no longer about UFOs and hasn't been for a long time. It's an acronym. It's a anachronistic non sequitur. It's a government-sponsored propaganda acronym, and it doesn't apply at all. It's about extraterrestrials, extraterrestrial craft, and extraterrestrial engagement.
So if you can just assume that UFOs are extraterrestrials, well, these beings, obviously, I don't think they're going to prize only our intelligence. I mean, obviously, we're not going to be as intelligent as the aliens. I mean, we presume that. So what is it that they care about humanity so much? Do they care about humans, or do they care about this planet, Earth? You know, I can take somebody like who is a new agey person, you know, somebody who loves their crystals. And yeah, some people will think negatively about them. I mean, if you're a scientific skeptic that thinks that these people are just trying to fool other people, if these people actually mean to hurt others by pretending to be a medicine man, then yeah, that sucks. It's not a good thing. But not all people who are into New Age are like this. And in fact, I actually think pretty positively about people who are into this subject, not so much because I believe in all of it, but because I believe that a lot of their intentions are positive, that those people genuinely mean well for others, And it makes me wonder if aliens are concerned about this as caretakers of Earth, if we are actually able to take care of this place. Obviously, like I said earlier, we're not going to be as smart as them. So what else would they value us with? This is why I'm talking about spirituality, because I think it's very important, and not just what it is that aliens might prize in humanity, but it could be the linchpin that eventually allows humans to experience disclosure with aliens. But to dive into this topic further, we actually have to talk about philosophy. And so you might recognize this individual. That's Karl Marx. And what's interesting about Karl Marx and what's interesting about Friedrich Nietzsche is that although they have basically polar opposite philosophies, I mean, one thinks about the individual, the other one is all about the collective, there is one thing that they do have in common. Well, first of all, let's talk about the fact that I don't think either Friedrich Nietzsche or Karl Marx would have wanted the history that occurred. I think that Nietzsche would have been horrified if he saw what happened with the Nazi Party. And similarly, I actually do believe that Karl Marx would have been horrified if he saw what happened with Stalin and Stalinism and everything that came with it. So these two individuals, the reason why I'm showing you this is because I think these two individuals actually intended well, but they had a specific philosophy that was more related to moral relativism, meaning it wasn't like the Christian values. What makes Christianity interesting is that it has kind of this absolute truths. They believe that there's an absolute good and there's an absolute evil. And Nietzsche believed that good and evil is relative. And Karl Marx believed that good and evil was historically based. So it's really more about the nature of power and how groups attain power. They're the ones who essentially define what good and evil is. So this is what I mean by moral relativism, that these individuals thought that morality was actually relative in how humans define it. And this is a really important philosophical point, because we really have to question, what is it that extraterrestrial aliens would be like? Would they believe in moral relativism, or would they believe in absolute truths about good and evil? And though obviously I don't have the answer to this, I do have a few guesses, call it an opinion. And not everybody's going to agree, but that's the nature of talking about spirituality. But so my take on this is kind of complicated. Okay, for example, let's first make the point that there could be good aliens and there could be bad aliens. I mean, I think there's a lot of ideas that these reptilian creatures, that they might actually be negative, at least according to the anecdotal evidence. Whatever people are saying, it seems to indicate that these reptilians are bad. And outside of negative aliens, there's also stories like the Great Flood, which we don't know if some alien species actually came down and restarted all of humanity. Is it possible? I mean, they talk about these giants that roamed the earth before the floods. Is it possible that there was actually a species of humans, maybe half Neanderthal, half Homo sapien, that had some kind of giganticism, biological giganticism, in the same way that ligers, that's a mixture of a tiger and a lion, how they are much bigger than either a tiger or a lion? Is it possible that we mixed with Neanderthals and somehow the half mixes were essentially these giants? I'm kind of throwing darts here, just kind of a lot of conjecture, obviously. But it is an interesting question to ask. Were we wiped out by some alien species? I don't know. And if we were, and I say we meaning our ancestors, but if our ancestors were, then what was the tipping point? How does an alien species have this ability to measure the aggregate good and the aggregate bad of a species, to eventually say, okay, now we're going to blow them up, as happened with Sodom and Gomorrah, or we're going to flood the entire place to basically wipe out an entire species? What is the tipping point? How did they even measure that? What is the aggregate measurement that would allow somebody to finally say, you know what? Let's wipe out that species. It's time. I think these are really interesting questions. And look, humans are kind of like this. We do play the role of God in some aspects in this planet. I mean, you look at how we put certain species in danger, and then we actually list them as endangered species, and then we try to protect them, and then we overfish in certain areas, and then we try to replenish the ecosystem. I mean, that is a way of playing God. But I think there's some clues as to what's actually happening spiritually with these aliens. And I wanted to talk about Jim Sparks, as I was mentioning earlier. Now, what's so interesting about Jim Sparks is that he had all these alien abduction experiences that apparently he forced himself to remember. So he has this kind of uncanny memory of alien abduction experiences, meaning he's remembered a lot of his experiences compared to the average abductee who it's kind of like in a fog. To him, when you listen to his stories, he started in the Art Bell show. And man, those episodes were epic if you didn't catch it. I would recommend right now just type Art Bell and Jim Sparks and check out some of those episodes because it will blow your mind.
Well, you know, Jim, after you described them that way, when you first described them, I thought, hey, why not just haul back, make a fist and knock one of these things clean across the room because they're little. They're 4 feet. I mean, so have at them. But the way you describe them and what they can do,
Because when you actually listen to this guy, you kind of hear that the honesty in his voice. I mean, you kind of can tell when somebody's trying to be a charlatan. You can't always tell, but generally you get a sense if somebody's telling the truth or not when they talk long enough. And this guy is definitely talked long enough, and his story is absolutely unbelievable. But I found really fascinating is that his story matched other stories that I heard. So the same story that Jim Sparks gave, I also saw on the We channel, the woman's channel. I kid you not, they actually had a show about alien abduction. Now, I don't think this season finished, but I did tune in one episode, and I was absolutely stunned because the woman proceeded to tell an abduction tale that was almost identical to the one that I heard in Jim Sparks. And this unbelievable story started in the forest. It started with this mass abduction that was happening where all these individuals were dazed out. Some of them were looking really scared. Other ones looked like they were in shock. Some of them were hugging each other, trembling. Other ones were kind of rolling back and forth. And then out of nowhere, 3 crafts came over the woods and picked up all these people. And then apparently the lights went out. And then when they reawoke, they were inside this craft. And he was leading them to this big white room that apparently had all these teleprompters. And these people sat down in these teleprompters and they started seeing images of Earth. Here, I think they actually have a drawing of this. And so apparently they were looking at this teleprompter and there's all these images that were flashing. And at first they were shown these beautiful images of Earth. And supposedly they were overflowing with emotions, feeling all these amazing feelings that are not normal. And they're showing the most beautiful images, just paradise, essentially. And slowly, the images would start getting a little bit uglier and a little bit more polluted and just a little bit more toxic. And all those positive emotions that those individuals were experiencing suddenly transformed into this horrific, gut-wrenching pain of what is happening to this planet. And when all the images were shown and everything was said and done, in the screen it said, "You're killing your planet. You're killing your planet." Now, I thought that was a pretty specific story until I heard it again on the We channel by a woman after I heard that from Jim Sparks, which makes me think, was she even there with him? Is it possible that Jim Sparks was there and she was also in that mass abduction? How often is this happening? Because I can guarantee you that woman did not look like she was lying, unless she just happened to hear Jim Sparks' case and just repeated it, But the thing is, there was another woman who actually had a very similar story, abduction story. And this is what I'm noticing with these alien abduction individuals, because I had an alien abduction episode, and like 3 or 4 of these individuals ended up having almost like identical things happening to them. I think 3 out of 4 had this motherly hybrid woman creature that they all saw, supposedly. How is this possible? Do they have some kind of UFO Bible and they're all reading from the same Bible and simultaneously creating a hoax to the mass world? And for what? What are they getting out of this? Ridicule? Come on. At a certain point, as crazy as this story might seem, it's almost crazier to think that this amount of people would be creating the exact same story while facing ridicule, and they all just do it. And then they're all like, yeah, that's cool. That's not how humans work. Humans are inherently shy of this type of stuff. You know, you look at the military-industrial complex, they're completely embarrassed by the whole topic of UFOs and aliens. At least according to Christopher Mellon, you know, he is one of the individuals from the To the Stars Academy. I forgot his title. It's like Assistant Deputy Secretary of Intelligence or something like that. But my point is, if Jim Sparks is telling the truth, if those ladies from the We Channel is telling the truth, the aliens seem to want what is best. If not for us, at least for this planet. So spiritually, at the very least, we can say they are environmentalists. But, you know, this goes deeper than that. If you look at Robert Lemus, Vice actually did a special on this. This individual is a famous artist who made these paintings of these weird reptilian-looking aliens. Now, I'm not so interested in the paintings themselves as to the actual story of why he started making these paintings. And as the story goes, he was apparently abducted. But like I said, it's not the abduction that matters to me. What matters is how he got there to the point of being abducted, which, according to his story, was that he was walking in the forest and suddenly encountered this saucer when he was in this very meditative, very enlightened type of states. And suddenly it came to me, oh, there's another individual who said the exact same thing. Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Stephen Greer said that when he was younger, that he had also gone to the forest, and while he was meditating, he encountered his first UFO. So UFOs and aliens are interested in people meditating and finding enlightenment? This is interesting. Is there some kind of conscious science that they are aware of? Or is it that they prize this aspect or this trait of humanity, that they think that these individuals are the ones who should be the leaders, are the ones who should be given this information because they will responsibly be able to disseminate it to the rest of the people without scaring the shit out of them? Hopefully not like as I showed you earlier, like the Travis Walton case. Yeah, that's pretty scary, man. That movie, a lot of people say, is one of the scariest movies they've ever seen. But I think you get my point. And this is why I'm talking about aliens and spirituality, because there's all these interesting correlations that I'm starting to see, these patterns, that these UFO and aliens are not just, as I said earlier, environmentalists, but they also seem to be interested in people who are interested in meditation, who are interested in finding these higher modes of consciousness. And that's why, like I said earlier, I'm not going to make fun of this new age person. As long as they're not selling some medicine man product and fooling some people in ways that is harmful, then I'm all good, because they mean well. And as I was saying earlier, it seems like the aliens are actually interested in this. At least people who mean well and who meditate and who are trying to find conscious enlightenment. And so I thought that was kind of cool that this painter, Robert Limos, had this experience that was so strong, that was so overwhelming, that his entire life, all he could do now is paint aliens. But lastly, something that I want to talk about that I also found kind of strange, that's connected to all of this, is the ant people. And I'm talking about the Hopi Indians, the same ones who lived in New Mexico. And I'm going to get back to New Mexico because there's something else we need to talk about. But the ant people, well, the Hopi Indians called them ant friend. They called these aliens friends. And if you didn't know, I've said this many times in previous episodes, but the translation of ants in the Hopi language is Anu, and friend is Naki. So when they say ant friend, that literally translates to Anunnaki, which, as many of you know, is the same word that the Sumerians gave for their sky gods, the ones who came from the sky to earth, essentially. Now, there's a lot of things to talk about with the Hopi Indians. First of all, they said that these ant friends helped them build caves to apparently escape a cataclysm. So whereas before we're talking about how at some point in human history, all of Earth might have been destroyed by a flood, or as the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah goes, there's also the concept that at some point humanity was saved from these ant friend or ant people, however you want to call it. And it's actually part of the Hopi legend that they didn't build these caves, or at least not all of them. They actually said that they were telepathically led by what they termed like a third eye in their head to go to these caves that were already built for them. They claimed that the ant people had built these caves for them to survive fire in the sky and a long winter, which is really strange because in the Zoroastric texts, Zoroastrianism, one of the earliest religions that is still being practiced, that occurred, I think, in East Iran, that's where it got started. Well, their texts talk about how these caves were built by the gods to protect them from a long winter. And when you go to the area in Cappadocia, Turkey, well, they found all this amazing underground complex that to this day archaeologists still don't know how in the world these caves were built. It's like this engineering mystery that they were able to build caverns that could sustain tens of thousands of people with thousands of air shafts engineered in ways that it seemed almost unfathomable that somebody would just randomly do this. There are some theories that they were potentially hiding away from invading forces, but I don't think that has been fully verified. And I think to a large extent, the whole engineering of this complex is a huge mystery as to how they were able to do this. But I found it interesting that you have texts from these disparate cultures that seem to match the same concept. So let me repeat that. We have two different cultures that have no affiliation with each other, that both talk about some gods helping them build a cave to escape a fire from the sky in the long winter. And there's actually physical geological records of an asteroid hitting Greenland right before the Younger Dryas started, the mini ice age. Okay, skeptics, please explain that to me. I'm really curious. I'm curious also because of the spiritual aspect of this. Why are these species saving humanity? You know, and talking about New Mexico, the reason why I find it so interesting that the Hopi Indians came from New Mexico is because when you look at their complex, right? I don't have the images here. I'm just going to flash it on the screen. Look at how it compares to the Dogon tribe of West Africa. And the Dogon tribe is that tribe in West Africa that is as old as the Sumerians. And apparently, according to them, their gods are the ones who gave them metallurgical, mathematical, and agricultural knowledge, including what plants to eat and not eat. They taught them how to write. They taught them all these complicated skills that are usually associated with high civilization, a civilization that has been prospering when you talk about metallurgical knowledge and things like that. But once again, according to French anthropologists, they claim that this came from some god from the sky, specifically from the second star of the Sirius star, which they call the Trinary star system, which was only known in 1994 by NASA scientists who actually were able to look at this solar perturbation and realize, holy crap, Sirius is a trinary system. I don't think they're aware of the Dogon culture, but certainly it's unbelievable that this West African culture that's as old as the Sumerians knew the exact celestial environment of a star to which the third star you can't even see with a telescope because it's a white dwarf. I don't know. It's all crazy to me, and I still find it unbelievable that people ignore all this evidence that can be cross-verified with cultures, but can also be verified by actually, whether you're talking about the geological records, by looking at the asteroid that hit Greenland, or you're talking about the celestial environments of Sirius, where they have a white dwarf, and the Dogon people actually called that third star system Po-Tolo. Po meaning seed or atom, which means highly dense, and white dwarfs are highly dense. So they even knew the exact physical nature of that star. And so outside of the fact that the Hopi Indians and the Dogon tribe had the exact same type of complex, despite them being continents apart, I found it a really interesting coincidence that the first nuclear weapon was tested in New Mexico, essentially the Hopi lands. You know, it's true. It happened in, I believe it was July, but here it is. This picture is the first nuclear weapon to be tested, and this happened in New Mexico 2 years before the Roswell crash, almost to the date. So that's kind of a strange coincidence that the Roswell crash happened in New Mexico, the same state that they were testing nuclear weapons. And so the reason why I bring this up in relation to the whole spirituality of aliens is that Roswell crash was kind of the beacon, the beginnings of the modern era of UFO sightings. But the aliens didn't come here when we built our first skyscraper in Chicago or New York or wherever it happened. Meaning they weren't interested in our ability to become civilized or our intelligence. Suddenly humans, these monkeys, are able to build huge buildings, skyscrapers that can reach the cloud tops. That's not what interested them. What interested them is when we found the matchbox, the matches, and started figuring ways to explode these crazy weapons that with enough of them could actually wipe out all of Earth. That's what created all the modern sightings, was when humanity started doing this crazy stuff. So once again, I ask, what are the aliens interested in? Our intelligence or our nature? Are we good or are we bad? And before I was talking about the whole philosophy about moral relativism versus ultimate truths, and there's no way I can gauge to you which one is the correct philosophy, but my opinion is that in large, when you look at Christians, unless you're talking about ancient times, they're not the ones creating atrocities. They're not the ones going out there and blowing up buildings, unless you're talking about a few sole individuals here and there. And it really makes me think whether there's something about this philosophy of thinking about absolute truths, about this absolute good or absolute evil. Because when you talk about moral relativism, meaning you're talking about Nietzsche or you're talking about Karl Marx, their systems have created absolute atrocities. They may not have intended it to be that way, but that ended up being the end result, that you have Stalinism and you had the Nazi Party come out from individuals who were not just atheists, but thought that good and evil is relative.
Man, they were nihilists, man.
Huh?
They kept saying they believe in nothing.
Nihilists. Fuck me.
That it's not anchored to an ultimate truth that we can all be guided towards. And this really got me thinking about the aliens, not just because of their environmentalist nature, as I was saying earlier, but because there's something called, as many of you might have seen from Star Trek, the Prime Directive. If you don't know this, this is the concept that you don't go to a planet that has intelligent species, you don't just show up, because that could affect their evolution and essentially could affect their ability to naturally evolve, that there is almost like a set of rules, in the same way that we don't just go to natural preserves and start blasting heavy metal music and disturbing the animals, you know. It's not what we do to try to help the wildlife. And I guess the Prime Directive is, in a sense, the alien species choosing, almost as like a law, to not come to places like Earth until we're ready. Now, what interests me about this Prime Directive is that it's followed by multiple species from multiple planets, and though we set off thousands of nuclear weapons, and though that caught the interest of extraterrestrials, they haven't wiped us out. Nobody has come here and invaded us. Nobody's coming here and destroying us. And if we do get abducted, for the most part, they place us back where we're at. They don't just steal us away, or at least we don't think so. So if we are that evil of people, that we have these atrocities like what happened with the Nazi parties, where we have genocides, and what happened to Stalin, and all these horrific acts, and essentially all the nuclear weapons that will give any Buddhist-minded individual a heart attack, all these atrocities that we do, they're not punishing us for this. So I'm asking, why is it that you have multiple species all following the same directive? I'm assuming if extraterrestrials are real, that it's not just one of them. I'm assuming it's a whole bunch of different species. And I'm assuming that because they're different species, they think completely different from each other. And if they think completely different from each other, but they're all following the same law, does this mean that there is some type of absolute good that these species are trying to follow? And once again, we talked about the reptilians, and perhaps there's some kind of galactic federation that attempts to keep the bad aliens out, but that's still an alliance of aliens all striving for the same common good. Is that really relative? To me, that seems kind of absolute. It seems like there's a defined track of good versus evil that a lot of alien species are willing to follow. Of course, it's only an opinion, but it definitely interests me when talking about the spirituality of aliens in general. And I'll be honest, this has actually been a much longer episode than I expected, but you know, before I got started with Second Earth, before even Secure Team was ever on YouTube, I had a channel where I was making certain videos on this topic. In one video, I brought up a former Canadian Prime Minister. I think he was what was the role? It was the ex-defense minister of Canada. Where I'm talking about Paul Hellyer. And I found a really cool speech by him. Kind of just wanted to end the episode with that speech. So here it is.
And he said that the United States forces, in cooperation with the extraterrestrials, had developed both zero-point energy and cold fusion. And these are the things people have been searching for forever. It's sort of like making gold out of lead, which I'm told they can do now too if they want to. So it's there, and even if it isn't, from what I know of the extraterrestrials, secondhand, from people who have talked to them and visited them and been abducted by them, they want us to save our planet. They would give it to us if the United States Air Force would stop shooting at them. But we've got to persuade the Americans that we don't want a world where somebody's got to master the world by armed force. We want a world where we change our priorities and get rid of these huge defense expenditures and use the money to provide food and shelter and education and clothing for people that don't have any. A different kind of world altogether than what we've had. And that they shouldn't take the extraterrestrials on for size, which they seem determined to do. But this is an interesting point. General Eisenhower said, beware of the industrial military complex. What he was really referring to was the fact that he had lost control of E.T. file. Nelson Rockefeller, it's an interesting name, he had hired him to work out who would run the thing. And a lot of the responsibility was turned over to private enterprise. So that the government of the United States has lost control of a whole pile of stuff that's going on out there. The President of the United States doesn't even know what's going on out there. And if he wanted to know, they would just say, Mr. President, you don't have clearance for that project. This is, what it is. But getting back to the point, either the technology exists, which I believe, or they would give it to us if we treat them like friendly neighbors and collaborators in the cosmos instead of as enemies that they were originally designated. Then there's no doubt that we could change the system in 10 years, which is about what we have to do if we change the banking system too. So we've got the money in order to be able to do it.
So yes, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of this is speculation. There's no way to know what the aliens for certain want from us, or whether they're just interested in protecting the planet, or if there's something to them that actually makes them want humans to be the best that we can be. Which is why I'm going to ask the audience to comment and please leave your thoughts below, because this is just an opinion, and so I really value what other people have to say. I'm sure there are people who are thinking things that my mind can't conceive of, and that's why it's so important to share ideas so that we can broaden our awareness. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Felipe speaking, signing out.